William Shakespeare, Timon of Athens, Act 4, Scene 3 ed. Worth, value ed. Intercourse, traffic, commerce, communication ed. Exchange, barter, interchange ed. 232. In this new revelation of his, St. Max merely repeats an old witticism already used repeatedly by, for example, the Saint Simonists. Cf. For example, Leçons sur l'industrie et les finances, Paris, 1832a, where, inter alia, it is stated: property will not be abolished, but its form will be changed, it will for the first time become true personification, it will for the first time acquire its real, individual character, pages 42, 43. Since this phrase, introduced by the French and particularly enlarged on by Pierre Leroux, was seized on with great pleasure by the German speculative socialists and used for further speculation, and finally gave occasion for reactionary intrigues and sharp practices, we shall not deal with it here where it says nothing, but later on, in connection with true socialism *5 Saint Sancho, following the example of Woeniger, whom Reichardt used, takes delight in turning the proletarians, and hence also the communists, into ragamuffins. He defines his ragamuffin on page 362 as a man possessing only ideal wealth. If Stirner's ragamuffins ever set up a vagabond kingdom, as the Paris beggars did in the 15th century, then Saint Sancho will be the vagabond king, for he is the perfect ragamuffin, a man possessing not even ideal wealth and therefore living on the interest from the capital of his opinion. See Humane Liberalism. After St. Max has interpreted liberalism and communism as imperfect modes of existence of philosophical man, and thereby also of modern German philosophy in general, which he was justified in doing, since in Germany not only liberalism but communism as well was given a petty bourgeois and at the same time high-flown ideological form, after this, it is easy for him to depict the latest forms of German philosophy, what he has called humane liberalism, as perfect liberalism and communism. And, at the same time, as criticism of both of them. With the aid of this holy construction we now get the following three delightful transformations, cf. also the economy of the Old Testament 1. The individual is not man, therefore he is of no value. Absence of personal will, ordinance whose name will be named, masterless political liberalism, which we have already dealt with above. The author of these lectures is Isaac Pereire ed. See this volume, p. 468 ed. The German Ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. St. Max 233. 2. The individual has nothing human, therefore no validity attaches to mine and thine or property, propertyless communism, which we have also already dealt with. 3. In criticism the individual should give place to man, now found for the first time, godless equals identity of masterless and propertyless humane liberalism, pages 180 to 81. In a more detailed exposition of this last negative unity, the unshakable orthodoxy of Jacques reaches the following climax, p. 189. The egoism of property loses its last possession if even the words my God become meaningless, for, a grand 4. God only exists if he has at heart the salvation of each individual, just as the latter seeks his salvation in God. According to this, the French bourgeois would only lose his last property if the word adieu were existed till now, have only to change their consciousness in order to become egoists in the extraordinary sense, hence that the egoist in agreement with himself is distinguished from the previous type only by consciousness i.e., only as a learned man, as a philosopher. It further follows from the whole historical outlook of St. Max that, because the former egoists were ruled only by the holy, the true egoist has to fight only against the holy. Unique history has shown us how St. Max transformed historical conditions into ideas, and then the egoist into a sinner against these ideas, how every egoistic manifestation was transformed into a sin against these ideas, the power of the privileged into a sin against the idea of equality, into the sin of despotism. Concerning the idea of freedom of competition therefore, It could be said in the book that private property is regarded by him, p. 155, as the personal, great, selfless egoists, essential and invincible, only to be fought by transforming them into something holy and then asserting that he abolishes the holiness in them, i.e., his holy idea about them, i.e. abolishes them only insofar as they exist in him as a holy one. B. A Galatians 5:14 ed. This paragraph is damaged ed. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. St. Max 253. Page 50 asterisk, how you are at each moment you are as your creation, and it is precisely this creation that you do not want to lose yourself, the Creator. You yourself are a higher being than yourself, i.e., you are not merely a creation, but likewise a creator, and it is this that you fail to recognize as an involuntary egoist, and for that reason the higher being is something foreign to you. In a somewhat different variation, this same wisdom is stated on page 239 of the book. The species is nothing, later it becomes all sorts of things, see self-enjoyment, and when the individual rises above the limitations of his individuality, it is precisely here that he himself appears as an individual. He exists only by raising himself, he exists only by not remaining what he is. Otherwise he would be done for, dead. In relation to these propositions, to his creation, Stirner at once begins to behave as creator asterisk, by no means losing himself in them. You are vous only for a moment, only as a momentary being are vous real. At each moment I am wholly what one am, what is separated from you. The momentary being, is something absolutely higher. Wigand, p. 170, and, on page 171, Ibid, your being is defined as our momentary being. Whereas in the book St. Max says that besides a momentary being he has also another, higher being, in the apologetical commentary the momentary being of his individual is equated with his complete and whole being, and every being as a momentary being is transformed into an absolutely higher being. In the book therefore he is, at every moment, a higher being than what he is at that moment, whereas in the commentary, everything that he is not directly at a given moment is defined as an absolutely higher being, a whole being, and in contrast to all this division we read on page 200 of the book. I know nothing about a division into an imperfect and a perfect ego. The egoist in agreement with himself needs no longer sacrifice himself to something higher, since in his own eyes he is himself this higher being, and he transfers the schism between a higher and a lower being into himself. So, in fact, Saint Sancho contra Feuerbach, the book, p. 243, the highest being has undergone nothing but a metamorphosis. The true egoism of Saint Max consists in an egoistic attitude to real egoism, to himself, as he is at each moment. This egoistic attitude to egoism is selflessness. From this aspect Saint Max as a creation is an egoist in the ordinary sense, as creator he is a selfless egoist. We shall also become acquainted with the opposite aspect, for both these aspects prove to be genuine determinations of reflection since they undergo absolute dialectics in which each of them is the opposite of itself. Marx wrote at the top of this page 2, Creator and Creation. 254. Before entering more deeply into this mystery in its esoteric form, one has to observe some of its arduous life battles. On pages 82, 83 Stirner achieves the feat of bringing the most general quality, the egoist, into agreement with himself as creator, from the standpoint of the world of spirit. Christianity aimed at delivering us from natural determination, determination through nature, from desires as a driving force. It consequently wished that man should not allow himself to be determined by his desires. This does not mean that he should have no desires, but that desires should not possess him, that they should not become fixed, unconquerable, ineradicable. Could we not apply these machinations of Christianity against desires to its own precept, that we should be determined by the Spirit? Then this would signify the dissolution of spirit, the dissolution of all thoughts. As one ought to have said there, so one would have to say now, we should indeed possess spirit, but spirit should not possess us. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts, Galatians 5:24, thus, according to Stirner, they deal with their crucified affections and lusts like true owners. He accepts Christianity in installments, but will not let matters rest at the crucified flesh alone, wanting to crucify his spirit as well, consequently, the whole fellow. The only reason why Christianity wanted to free us from the domination of the flesh and desires as a driving force was because it regarded our flesh, our desires as something foreign to us. It wanted to free us from determination by nature only because it regarded our own nature as not belonging to us. For if I myself am not nature, if my natural desires, my whole natural character, do not belong to myself, and this is the doctrine of Christianity, then all determination by nature, whether due to my own natural character or to what is known as external nature, seems to me a determination by something foreign, a fetter, compulsion used against me, heteronomy as opposed to autonomy of the spirit. Stirner accepts this Christian dialectic without examining it and then applies it to our spirit. Incidentally, Christianity has indeed never succeeded in freeing us from the domination of desires, even in that just milieu sense foisted on it by St. Max. It does not go beyond mere moral injunctions, which remain ineffective in real life. Stirner takes moral injunctions for real deeds and supplements them with the further categorical imperative, we should indeed possess spirit, but spirit should not possess us, and consequently all his egoism in agreement with itself is reduced on closer examination, as Hegel would say, to a moral philosophy that is as delightful as it is edifying and contemplative. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. St. Max 255. Whether a desire becomes fixed or not, i.e., whether it obtains exclusive power over us, which, however, does not exclude further progress, depends on whether material circumstances, bad mundane conditions, permit the normal satisfaction of this desire and, on the other hand, the development of a totality of desires. This latter depends, in turn, on whether we live in circumstances that allow all-round activity and thereby the full development of all our potentialities. On the actual conditions, and the possibility of development they give each individual, depends also whether thoughts become fixed or not, just as, for example, the fixed ideas of the German philosophers, these victims of society, qui nous font pitié *, are inseparable from the German conditions. Incidentally, in Stirner the domination of desires is a mere phrase, the imprint of the absolute saint. Thus, still keeping to the touching example of the avaricious person, we read: an avaricious person is not an owner, but a servant, and he can do nothing for his own sake without at the same time doing it for the sake of his master. p. 400. No one can do anything without at the same time doing it for the sake of one or other of his needs and for the sake of the organ of this need. For Stirner this means that this need and its organ are made into a master over him, just as earlier he made the means for satisfying a need, cf. the sections on political liberalism and communism, into a master over him. Stirner cannot eat without at the same time eating for the sake of his stomach. If the worldly conditions prevent him from satisfying his stomach, then his stomach becomes a master over him, the desire to eat becomes a fixed desire, and the thought of eating becomes a fixed idea, which at the same time gives him an example of the influence of world conditions in fixing his desires and ideas. Sancho's revolt against the fixation of desires and thoughts is thus reduced to an impotent moral injunction about self-control, and provides new evidence that he merely gives an ideologically high-sounding expression to the most trivial sentiments of the petty bourgeois. Thus, in this first example he fights, on the one hand, against his carnal desires, and on the other against his spiritual thoughts, on the one hand against his flesh, on the other against his spirit, when they, his creations, want to become independent of him, their creator. How our saint conducts the struggle, how he behaves as creator towards his creation, we shall now see. In the Christian in the ordinary sense, in the chrétien simple, to use Fourier's expression, spirit has undivided power and pays no heed to any persuasion of the flesh. However, only through the flesh can I break the tyranny of the spirit, For only when man perceives also his flesh does he perceive himself wholly, and only when he perceives himself wholly does he become perceptive or rational. But as soon as the flesh speaks, and as cannot be otherwise in a passionate tone, then he, the chrétien simple, believes he hears devil voices, voices against the spirit, and with good reason comes out passionately against them. He would not be a Christian if he were prepared to tolerate them. p. 83. Hence, when his spirit wishes to acquire independence in relation to him, Saint Max calls his flesh to his aid, and when his flesh individual by present-day relations, some of these desires, namely desires which exist under all relations, and only change their form and direction under different social relations, are merely altered by the communist social system, for they are given the opportunity to develop normally, but others, namely those originating solely in a particular society, under particular conditions of production and intercourse, are totally deprived of their conditions of existence. Which of the desires will be merely changed and which eliminated in a communist society can only be determined in a practical way, by changing the real, actual desires, and not by making comparisons with earlier historical conditions. The two expressions, fixed and desires, which we have just used in order to be able to disprove this unique fact of Stirner's, are of course quite inappropriate. The fact that one desire of an individual in modern society can be satisfied at the expense of all others, and that this ought not to be, and that this is more or less the case with all individuals in the world today, and that thereby the free development of the individual as a whole is made impossible. This fact is expressed by Stirner thus: the desires become fixed in the egoist in disagreement with himself, for Stirner knows nothing of the empirical connection of this fact with the world as it is today. A desire is already by its mere existence something fixed, and it can occur only to Saint Max and his like not to allow his sex instinct, for instance, to become fixed. It is that already, and will cease to be fixed only as the result of castration or impotence. Each need, which forms the basis of a desire, is likewise something fixed, and try as he may, Saint Max cannot abolish this fixedness, and for example contrive to free himself from the necessity of eating within fixed periods of time. The communists have no intention of abolishing the fixedness of their desires and needs, an intention which Stirner, immersed in his world of fancy, ascribes to them and to all other men. They only strive to achieve an organization of production and intercourse which will make possible the normal satisfaction of all needs, i.e., a satisfaction which is limited only by the needs themselves. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. Saint Max 257. Becomes rebellious. He remembers that he is also spirit. What the Christian does in one direction, Saint Max does in both. He is the chrétien compose. He once again reveals himself as the perfect Christian. Here, in this example, Saint Max, as spirit, does not appear as the creator of his flesh and vice versa. He finds his flesh and his spirit both present, and only when one side rebels does he remember that he has also the other, and asserts this other side, as his true ego, against it. Here, therefore, Saint Max is creator only insofar as he is one who is also otherwise determined, insofar as he possesses yet another quality besides that which it just suits him to subsume under the category of creation. His entire creative activity consists here in the good resolution to perceive himself, and indeed to perceive himself entirely, or be rational * to perceive himself as a complete, entire being, as a being different from his momentary being, and even in direct contradiction to the kind of being he is momentarily. Let us now turn to one of the arduous life battles of our saint, pages 80, 81. My zeal need not be less than the most fanatical, but at the same time I remain towards it cold as ice, sceptical, and its most irreconcilable enemy. I remain its judge, for I am its owner. If one desires to give meaning to what Saint Sancho says about himself, then it amounts to this: his creative activity here is limited to the fact that in his zeal he preserves the consciousness of his zeal, that he reflects on it, that he adopts the attitude of the reflecting ego to himself as the real ego. It is to consciousness that he arbitrarily gives the name creator. He is creator only insofar as he possesses consciousness. Thereupon, you forget yourself in sweet self-oblivion. But do you exist only when you think of yourself, and do you vanish when you forget yourself? Who does not forget himself at every instant, who does not lose sight of himself 1,000 times an hour? Wigand, pages 157, 158. This, of course, Sancho cannot forgive his self-oblivion and therefore remains at the same time its most irreconcilable enemy. Saint Max, the creation, burns with immense zeal at the very time when Saint Max, the creator, has already risen above his zeal by means of reflection, or the real Saint Max burns with zeal, and the reflecting Saint Max imagines that he has risen above this zeal. This asterisk here, therefore, Saint Max completely justifies Feuerbach's touching example of the hetaira and the beloved. In the first case, a man perceives only his flesh or only her flesh, in the second he perceives himself entirely or her entirely. See Wigand, pages 170, 171. 258. Rising in reflection above what he actually is now amusingly and adventurously described in the phrases of a novel to the effect that he allows his zeal to remain in existence, i.e., he does not draw any serious consequences from his hostility to it, but his attitude towards it is cold as ice, sceptical and that of its most irreconcilable enemy. Insofar as Saint Max burns with zeal, i.e., insofar as zeal is his true quality, his attitude to it is not that of creator, and insofar as his attitude is that of creator, he does not really burn with zeal. Zeal is foreign to him, not a quality of him. So long as he burns with zeal he is not the owner of zeal, and as soon as he becomes the owner, he ceases to burn with zeal. As an aggregate complex, he is at every instant, in the capacity of creator and owner, the sum total of all his qualities, with the exception of the one quality which he puts in opposition to himself, the embodiment of all the others as creation and property, so that precisely that quality which he stresses as his own is always foreign to him. No matter how extravagant Saint Max's true story of his heroic exploits within himself, in his own consciousness, may sound, it is nevertheless an acknowledged fact that there do exist reflecting individuals, who imagine that in and through reflection they have risen above everything because in actual fact they never go beyond reflection. This trick of declaring oneself against some definite quality as being someone who is also otherwise determined, namely, in the present example as being the possessor of reflection directed towards the opposite, this trick can be applied with the necessary variations to any quality you choose. For example, my indifference need be no less than that of the most blasé person, but at the same time I remain towards it extremely ardent, sceptical, and its most irreconcilable enemy, etc. It should not be forgotten that the aggregate complex of all his qualities, the owner in which capacity Saint Sancho by reflecting opposes one particular quality, is in this case nothing but *. The following passage is crossed out in the manuscript. All this is in fact merely a high-flown description of the bourgeois, who controls each of his emotions so that he should not sustain any loss, and on the other hand boasts about numerous qualities, example philanthropic zeal, towards which he must remain cold as ice, sceptical and an irreconcilable enemy, in order not to lose himself as owner in his philanthropic zeal but to remain the owner of philanthropy. Whereas the bourgeois sacrifices his inclinations and desires always for a definite real interest, Saint Max sacrifices the quality towards which he adopts the attitude of the most irreconcilable enemy for the sake of his reflecting ego, his reflection. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. Saint Max 259. Sancho's simple reflection about this one quality, which he has transformed into his ego by putting forward, instead of the whole complex, one merely reflecting quality and putting forward in opposition to each of his qualities and to the series merely the one quality of reflection, an ego, and himself as the imagined ego. Now he himself gives expression to this hostile attitude to himself, this solemn parody of Bentham's bookkeeping 81 of his own interests and qualities. Page 188, an interest, no matter towards what end it may be directed, acquires a slave in the shape of myself. If I am unable to rid myself of it, it is no longer my property, but I am its property. Let us, therefore, accept the directive of criticism that we should feel happy only in dissolution. We. Who are we? It never occurs to us to accept the directive of criticism. Thus Saint Max, who for the moment is under the police surveillance of criticism, here demands the same well-being for all, equal well-being for all in one and the same respect, the direct tyrannical domination of religion. His interestedness in the extraordinary sense is here revealed as a heavenly disinterestedness. Incidentally, there is no need here to deal at length with the fact that in existing society it does not at all depend on Saint Sancho whether an interest acquires a slave in the shape of himself and whether he is unable to rid himself of it. The fixation of interests through division of labor and class relations is far more obvious than the fixation of desires and thoughts. In order to outbid critical criticism, our saint should at least have gone as far as the dissolution of dissolution, for otherwise dissolution becomes an interest which he cannot get rid of, which in him acquires a slave. Dissolution is no longer his property, but he is the property of dissolution. Had he wanted to be consistent in the example just given, he should have treated his zeal against his own zeal as an interest and behaved towards it as an irreconcilable enemy. But he should have also considered his ice-cold disinterestedness in relation to his ice-cold zeal and become just as wholly ice-cold, and thereby, obviously, he would have spared his original interest and hence himself the temptation to turn in a circle on the heel of speculation instead. He cheerfully continues, Ibid. I shall only take care to safeguard my own property for myself, i.e., to safeguard myself from my property, and, in order to safeguard it, I take it back into myself at 260. Any time, I destroy in it any inclination towards independence and absorb it before it becomes fixed and can become a fixed idea or passion. How does Stirner absorb the persons who are his property? Stirner has just allowed himself to be given a vocation by criticism. He asserts that he at once absorbs this vocation again, by saying on page 189. I do this, however, not for the sake of my human vocation, but because I call or myself to do so. If I do not call on myself to do so, I am, as we have just heard, a slave, not an owner, not a true egoist. I do not behave to myself as creator, as I should do as a true egoist. Therefore, insofar as a person wants to be a true egoist, he must call himself to this vocation given him by criticism. Thus, it is a universal vocation, a vocation for all, not merely his vocation, but also his vocation. On the other hand, the true egoist appears here as an ideal which is unattainable by the majority of individuals, for, p. 434, innately limited intellects unquestionably form the most numerous class of mankind, and how could these limited intellects be able to penetrate the mystery of unlimited absorption of oneself and the world? Incidentally, all these terrible expressions to destroy, to absorb etc. are merely a new variation of the above-mentioned ice-cold, most irreconcilable enemy. Now, at last, we are put in a position to obtain an insight into Stirner's objections to communism. They were nothing but a preliminary, concealed legitimization of his egoism in agreement with itself, in which these objections are resurrected in the flesh. The equal well-being of all in one and the same respect is resurrected in the demand that we should only feel happy in dissolution. Care is resurrected in the form of the unique care to secure one's ego as one's property, but with the passage of time care again arises as to how one can arrive at a unity, viz., unity of creator and creation. And, finally, humanism reappears, which in the form of the true egoist confronts empirical individuals as an unattainable ideal. Hence page 117 of the book should read as follows: Egoism in agreement with itself really endeavors to transform every man into a secret police state. The spy and sleuth reflection keeps a strict eye on every impulse of spirit and body, and every deed and thought, every manifestation of life is, for him, a matter of reflection, i.e., a police matter. It is this dismemberment of man into natural instinct and reflection, the inner plebeian. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. St. Max 261. Creation, and the internal police creator, which constitutes the egoist in agreement with himself. Hess, Die letzten Philosophen, p. 26, reproached our saint. He is constantly under the secret police surveillance of his critical conscience. He has not forgotten the directive of criticism, to feel happy only in dissolution. The egoist, his critical conscience is always reminding him, should never become so interested in anything as to devote himself entirely to his subject, and so on. Saint Max empowers himself to answer as follows, when Hess says of Stirner that he is constantly, what does this mean except that when he criticizes he wants to criticize not at random, i.e., by the way, in the unique fashion, not talking twaddle, but criticizing properly, i.e., like a human being? What it means, when Hess speaks of the secret police, etc., is so clear from the passage by Hess quoted above that even St. Max's unique understanding of it can only be explained as a deliberate misunderstanding. His virtuosity of thought is transformed here into a virtuosity in lying, for which we do not reproach him since it was his only way out, but which is hardly in keeping with the subtle little distinctions on the right to lie which he sets out elsewhere in the book. Incidentally, we have already demonstrated at greater length than he deserves that when he criticizes, Sancho by no means criticizes properly, but criticizes at random and talks twaddle. Thus, the attitude of the true egoist as creator towards himself as creation was first of all defined in the sense that in opposition to a definition in which he became fixed as a creation, for example, as against himself as thinker, as spirit, he asserts himself as a person also otherwise determined, as flesh. Later, he no longer asserts himself as really also otherwise determined, but as the mere idea of being also otherwise determined in general. Hence, in the above example, as someone who also does not think, who is thoughtless or indifferent to thought, an idea which he abandons again as soon as its nonsensicalness becomes evident. See above on turning round on the heel of speculation. 2. Hence the creative activity consisted here in the reflection that this single determination, in the present case thought, could also be indifferent for him, i.e., it consisted in reflecting in general. As a result, of course, he creates only reflective. The following passage is crossed out in the manuscript incidentally. If St. Max makes a Prussian officer of high rank say, every Prussian carries his gendarme in his heart, it ought to read, the king's gendarme, for only the egoist in agreement with himself carries his own gendarme in his heart. See this volume, p. 259 ed. 262. Definitions. If he creates anything at all, example the idea of antithesis, the simple essence of which is concealed by all kinds of fiery arabesques. As for the content of himself as a creation, we have seen that nowhere does he create this content, these definite qualities, example his thought, his zeal, etc., but only the reflective definition of this content as creation, the idea that these definite qualities are his creations. All his qualities are present in him, and whence they come is all the same to him. He, therefore, needs neither to develop them, for example, to learn to dance, in order to have mastery over his feet, or to exercise his thought on material which is not given to everyone, and is not procurable by everyone, in order to become the owner of his thought, nor does he need to worry about the conditions in the world, which in reality determine the extent to which an individual can develop. Stirner actually only rids himself of one quality by means of another, i.e., the suppression of his remaining qualities by this other. In reality, however, as we have already shown, he does this only insofar as this quality has not only achieved free development, i.e., has not remained merely potential, but also insofar as conditions in the world have permitted him to develop in an equal measure a totality of qualities, that is to say, thanks to the division of labor, thus making possible the predominant pursuit of a single passion, e.g., that of writing books. In general, it is an absurdity to assume, as St. Max does, that one could satisfy one passion, apart from all others, that one could satisfy it without at the same time satisfying oneself, the entire living individual. If this passion assumes an abstract, isolated character, if it confronts me as an alien power, if, therefore, the satisfaction of the individual appears as the one-sided satisfaction of a single passion, this by no means depends on consciousness or goodwill, and least of all on lack of reflection on the concept of this quality, as Saint Max imagines. It depends not on consciousness, but on being, not on thought, but on life. It depends on the individual's empirical development and manifestation of life, which in turn depends on the conditions obtaining in the world. If the circumstances in which the individual lives allow him only the one-sided development of one quality at the expense of all the rest, if they give him the material and time to develop only that one quality, then this individual achieves only a one-sided, crippled development. No moral preaching avails here. See this volume, pages 254-55 ed. The German Ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. Saint Max 263. And the manner in which this one, preeminently favored quality develops depends again, on the one hand, on the material available for its development and, on the other hand, on the degree and manner in which the other qualities are suppressed. Precisely because thought, for example, is the thought of a particular, definite individual, it remains his definite thought, determined by his individuality and the conditions in which he lives. The thinking individual therefore has no need to resort to prolonged reflection about thought as such in order to declare that his thought is his own thought, his property. From the outset it is his own, peculiarly determined thought, and it was precisely his peculiarity which in the case of Saint Sancho was found to be the opposite of this, a peculiarity which is peculiarity as such. In the case of an individual, for example, whose life embraces a wide circle of varied activities and practical relations to the world, and who, therefore, lives a many-sided life, thought has the same character of universality as every other manifestation of his life. Consequently, it neither becomes fixed in the form of abstract thought nor does it need complicated tricks of reflection when the individual passes from thought to some other manifestation of life. From the outset it is always a factor in the total life of the individual, one which disappears and is reproduced as required. In the case of a parochial Berlin schoolmaster or author, however, whose activity is restricted to arduous work on the one hand and the pleasure of thought on the other, whose world extends from Moabit to Köpenick and ends behind the Hamburger Tor, 82, whose relations to this world are reduced to a minimum by his pitiful position in life, when such an individual experiences the need to think, it is indeed inevitable that his thought becomes just as abstract as he himself and his life, and that thought confronts him, who is quite incapable of resistance, in the form of a fixed power, whose activity offers the individual the possibility of a momentary escape from his bad world, of a momentary pleasure. In the case of such an individual the few remaining desires, which arise not so much from intercourse with the world as from the constitution of the human body, express themselves only through repercussion, i.e., they assume in their narrow development the same one-sided and crude character as does his thought, they appear only at long intervals, stimulated by the excessive development of the predominant desire, fortified by immediate physical causes, e.g. stomach spasm, and are manifested turbulently and forcibly, with the most brutal suppression of the 264 ordinary, natural desire. This leads to further domination over thought. As a matter of course, the schoolmaster's thinking reflects on and speculates about this empirical fact in a schoolmasterly fashion. But the mere announcement that Stirner in general creates his qualities does not explain even their particular form of development. The extent to which these qualities develop on the universal or local scale, the extent to which they transcend local narrow-mindedness or remain within its confines, depends not on Stirner, but on the development of world intercourse and on the part which he and the locality where he lives play in it. That under favorable circumstances some individuals are able to rid themselves of their local narrow-mindedness is by no means due to individuals imagining that they have got rid of, or intend to get rid of their local narrow-mindedness, but is only due to the fact that in their real empirical life individuals, actuated by empirical needs, have been able to bring about world intercourse. The only thing our saint achieves with the aid of his arduous reflection about his qualities and passions is that by his constant crotchetiness and scuffling with them he poisons the enjoyment and satisfaction of them. Saint Max creates, as already said, only himself as a creation, i.e., he is satisfied with placing himself in this category of created entity. His activity as creator consists in regarding himself as a creation, and he does not even go on to resolve this division of himself into creator and creation, which is his own product. The division into the essential and the inessential becomes for him a permanent life process, hence mere appearance, i.e., his real life exists only in pure reflection, is not even actual existence, for since this latter is at every instant outside him and his reflection, he tries in vain to present reflection as essential. But since this enemy, viz., the true egoist as a creation, begets himself in his defeat, since consciousness, by becoming fixed on him, does not free itself from him, but instead always dwells on him and always sees itself besmirched, and since this the following passage is crossed out in the manuscript, this specifically revolutionary attitude of the communists to the hitherto existing conditions of the life of the individuals has already been described above. See this volume, pages 246, 255. In a later profane passage Saint Max admits that the ego receives an impulse, in Fichte's sense, from the world. That the communists intend to gain control over this impulse, which indeed becomes an extremely complex and multifariously determined impulse if one is not content with the mere phrase, is, of course, for Saint Max much too daring an idea to discuss. The German ideology. The Leipzig Council. 3. Saint Max 265. Content of his endeavor is at the same time the very lowest. We find only an individual restricted to himself and his petty activity, inactivity, and brooding over himself, as unhappy as he is wretched. Hegel. What we have said so far about the division of Sancho into creator and creation, he himself now finally expresses in a logical form. The creator and the creation are transformed into the presupposing and the presupposed ego, or, inasmuch as his presupposition of his ego is a positing, into the positing and the posited ego. I for my part start from a certain presupposition, since I presuppose myself, but my presupposition does not strive for its perfection, rather does Saint Max strive for its abasement. On the contrary, it serves me merely as something to enjoy and consume, an enviable enjoyment. I am nourished by my presupposition alone and exist only bv consuming it. But for that reason, for that reason. The presupposition in question is no presupposition at all, for since, for since. I am the unique, it should read, the true egoist in agreement with himself. I know nothing about the duality of a presupposing and presupposed ego, of an imperfect and perfect ego or man. It should read, the perfection of my ego consists in this alone, that at every instant I know myself as an imperfect ego, as a creation but, a magnificent but. The fact that I consume myself signifies merely that I am. It should read, the fact that I am signifies here merely that in me I consume in imagination the category of the presupposed. I do not presuppose myself, because I really only posit or create myself perpetually, viz., I posit and create myself as the presupposed, posited or created, and I am I only because I am not presupposed, but posited. It should read, and I exist only because I am antecedent to my positing J, and, again, I am posited only at the moment when I posit myself, i.e., I am creator and creation in one. Stirner is a posited man, since he is always a posited ego, and his ego is also a man. Wigand, p. 183. For that reason he is a posited man, for since he is never driven by his passions to excesses, therefore, he is what burghers call a sedate man, but the fact that he is a sedate man signifies merely that he always keeps an account of his own transformations and refractions. What was so far only for us to use for once, as Stirner does, the language of Hegel, viz., that his whole creative activity had no other content than general definitions of reflection, is now posited by Stirner himself. Saint Max's struggle against essence here attains its final goal in that he identifies himself with essence, and indeed with pure, speculative essence. The relation of creator and creation is transformed into an explication of self-presupposition, i.e., Stirner transforms into an extremely clumsy and confused idea what Hegel says about reflection in the doctrine of essence. Since GWF Hegel, Phenomenologie des Geists. B. Selbstbewusstsein. 3. Das Unglücklichbewusstsein ed. In the German original this is a pun, gesetzter man can mean sedate man or posited man. Ed. 266. Saint Max takes out one dement of his reflection, viz., positing reflection, his fantasies become negative, because he transforms himself, etc., into self-presupposition, in contradistinction to himself as the positing and himself as the posited, and transforms reflection into the mystical antithesis of creator and creation. It should be pointed out, by the way, that in Thig's section of his logic Hegel analyzes the machinations of the creative nothing, which explains also why Saint Max already on page 8 had to posit himself as this creative nothing. We shall now episodically insert a few passages from Hegel's explanation of self-presupposition for comparison with Saint Max's explanation. But as Hegel does not write so incoherently and at random as our Jacques-Le Bonhomme, we shall have to collect these passages from various pages of the logic in order to bring them into correspondence with Sancho's great thesis. Essence presupposes itself and is itself the transcendence of this presupposition. Since it is the repulsion of itself from itself or indifference towards itself, negative relation to itself, it thereby posits itself against itself. Positing has no presupposition, the other is only posited through essence itself. Thus, reflection is only the negative of itself. Reflection insofar as it presupposes is simply positing reflection. It consists therefore in this, that it is itself and not itself in a unity, creator and creation in one. Hegel, Logic, 2, pages 5, 16, 17, 18, 22. One might have expected from Stirner's virtuosity of thought that he would have gone on to further researches into Hegel's logic. However, he wisely refrained from doing so. For, if he had done so, he would have found that he, as mere posited ego, as creation, i.e., insofar as he possesses existence, is merely a seeming ego, and he is essence, creator, only insofar as he does not exist, but only imagines himself. We have already seen, and shall see again further on, that all his qualities, his whole activity, and his whole attitude to the world, are a mere appearance which he creates for himself, nothing but juggling tricks on the tightrope of the objective. His ego is always a dumb, hidden ego, hidden in his ego imagined as essence. Since the true egoist in his creative activity is, therefore, only a paraphrase of speculative reflection or pure essence, it follows, according to the myth, by natural reproduction, as was already revealed when examining the arduous life battle